Hi, my name is Lauren Stanley, and the topic of my presentation today discusses disaster management in India. Let's start out by addressing the nature of disasters in India. India ranks among the top 5 countries in the world for the number of natural disasters that occur, and with India being one of the fastest growing countries in the world, this makes them very vulnerable to disasters. With over half of the workforce in rural agricultural services and widespread poverty throughout the country, they lack the physical and social infrastructure to respond and recover as quickly to catastrophic disasters. Disaster management in India really began to evolve during the United Nations International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction, and more specifically due to the 1994 Yokohama Strategy. In the past, the approach to disaster management was one of a reactive nature, where the government did not take any action until after the disaster had occurred. But as they began to realize the importance of protecting citizens' lives and protect properties, as well as reducing the socioeconomic damage from disasters, the government began to change its approach to disaster management. In December 2005, the government enacted the Disaster Management Act, which led to a coordinated top-down implementation approach that begins at the national level and filters down to the state and district levels. At the top of the chain of command sits the National Disaster Management Authority, which is a subset of the Ministry of Home Affairs. They operate in a manner similar to FEMA in the U.S. Moving down the command ladder, at the state level, the State Disaster Management Authority is responsible for implementing policies of the state plan outlined by the national level within the states. At the local level, the District Disaster Management Authority coordinates and implements disaster management according to principles outlined by both the state and national levels. As I mentioned, the Disaster Management Act was created for disaster mitigation, preparedness, and prevention purposes, which led to the National Disaster Management Authority, who now leads the new integrated approach to disaster management throughout the country. During the same time, the government created the Disaster Risk Management Program to minimize losses and reduce vulnerability through mainstreaming multi-hazard risk management and sustainable recovery plans through all levels of government. To accomplish this, a number of components to the program were phased in over a 6-year period, which suggested India address disasters through structural and non-structural methods to reduce the impact of disasters and improve management skills for all levels of government to prepare, prevent, and respond effectively. These structural methods include, for example, training as a key instrument for preparation, as well as awareness campaigns for multi-hazard preparedness and mitigation, and beginning to include disaster management in school curriculum. The non-structural methods were intended to develop vulnerability and risk indices, which include forecasting methods used as early warning systems. For example, the Indian Meteorological Department and Flood Forecasting Network created to monitor and provide warnings. So as I mentioned earlier, the NDMA is charged with a diverse set of functions, including maintaining internal security, which are outlined in the National Policy on Disaster Management. It details how the country can become better prepared for disasters and identifies the appropriate people or groups responsible for disaster management functions. Various agencies complete hazard mapping and monitor building standards for critical infrastructure inside the country. Another mitigation technique used is to understand the environmental conditions in the country and be able to build around fragile ecosystems. It also discusses the difficulty in monitoring and addressing extreme disaster events due to the impacts of climate change on India. A number of participants support mitigation and preparedness activities, as well as response efforts. The traditional command structure that exists in the U.S. sort of resembles the general administrative framework that manages disasters in India, with the Incident Command System acting as the management system to organize and standardize emergency activities while responding to a disaster. Response operations are filtered down to the national, state, and district level and include outside stakeholders such as NGOs and the private sector. The National Institute of Disaster Management also plays a key role in strategically managing disasters in India, and also takes responsibility for training, research, and policy development while creating many risk management programs, publishing literature to educate the public and emergency officials, and supporting the functions of disaster management centers in all states. One of the largest obstacles to effective disaster management stems from the government and its authoritarian nature and tendency for corruption due to poor economic conditions. This hinders the ability to provide the appropriate disaster management processes and negatively impacts citizens' lives. The top-down implementation approach limits the role of local officials and communities during a disaster, but they are usually the ones that have more detailed knowledge about a specific region and may be better equipped to provide that information to higher-level officials. Further complicating this matter is the extent to which many regions in India are still developing and are very poor. Overcoming the conditions associated with poverty can be an enormous task for emergency management personnel, but India is making significant progress. India is becoming more aware of disasters through research and knowledge to better forecast, provide education and training, and collaborate among all levels of government and communities. The process currently in place to prepare and respond is a fresh approach to managing disasters in a more coordinated and strategic manner that will benefit both citizens and officials. Educating the youth through school programs is a new pioneering path taken by India that may pave the way for other less developed and developing countries to address disasters in the future, as well as respond and recover from their devastating consequences. Thank you.